Have you ever been learning a new language and you get stuck? You know the feeling. Your brain just stalls, you can't find the right word. But what if I told you those mistakes aren't just mistakes? What if they're actually a sign of genius? Today we're diving into some incredible science that is completely changing how we think about the errors we make when we learn. So let's really put ourselves in that situation. You're in the middle of a great conversation. You're trying to make a point in a language you're learning, and boom, you hit a wall. The word you need just isn't there. What does your brain do in that split second? Where does it even begin to look for a replacement? Well, you'd think there are two main possibilities, right? The obvious guess is that you just grab a word from your native language. But for decades, a really popular scientific theory suggested something else. It predicted that your brain is actually a bit smarter than that it would search for a word from a different foreign language you know, specifically the one that's the most similar to the one you're trying to speak. Now, the official name is the psychotypological hypothesis. Yeah, it's a mouthful. So let's just call it the closest cousin rule. And the logic kind of makes sense. Your brain wants to find the most efficient shortcut. So let's say you're a native English speaker learning Italian, but you also know Spanish. The closest cousin rule says your brain would borrow from Spanish, its closest cousin, not from English. It sounds pretty plausible, doesn't it? But how do you actually prove that? How do you test it in the real world? Well, a fascinating 2025 study designed the perfect scenario to find out once and for all. It was finally time to put the closest cousin rule on trial. Okay, so here's the setup. The subjects were 15 highly advanced students. They were all native Italian speakers, and they were all learning Portuguese. Now, here is the crucial part. Every single one of them also had experience with Spanish. And any linguist will tell you, Spanish is a much closer cousin to Portuguese than Italian is. So if the theory was right, any mistakes they made should have a Spanish accent, not an Italian one. And the researchers collected a ton of data. We're talking 90 essays, which added up to almost 49,000 words. So this wasn't just some quick casual observation. This was a super deep dive into the real-world habits of these language learners. And it all boiled down to this one single question. When a student couldn't find the right Portuguese word and had to improvise, when they made an error, would the linguistic fingerprint of that error point back to their native Italian, or would it point to their closest cousin, Spanish? Okay, get ready for this because the results were absolutely stunning. When the learners made a mistake, the source of that error was their native Italian, 22 times. And what about Spanish, the so-called closest cousin? Only twice, just 2 times. The verdict could not have been clearer. The closest cousin rule, a theory that stood for decades, was just wrong. Overwhelmingly, despite knowing a much more similar language, these advanced students defaulted right back to their mother tongue when they got stuck. And that leads us to the really interesting question. Why? I mean, these aren't beginners, these are advanced speakers. So why would they fall back on a language that's less similar? Well, the answer isn't about failure at all. It's about a highly sophisticated process going on inside their brains. To really get this, we need to talk about something called a neologism, which is basically just a brand new made-up word. See, the researchers found that these students weren't just lazily borrowing from Italian. No, they were doing something way more creative. They were taking Italian concepts and actively rebuilding them from the ground up using Portuguese rules. So let's be super clear about this. This isn't just swapping one word for another. This is an act of construction. It shows that advanced learners have such a deep, intuitive grasp of the new language's structure that they can actually use it like a toolkit to build the words they need, right on the spot. So the mental process looks something like this. Step 1. The learner realizes, oops, I don't know the Portuguese word for this. Step 2. They reach back and grab the core concept from their native Italian. Step 3. And this is the magic part. They skillfully apply Portuguese spelling and grammar rules to that Italian root. And finally, step 4, they create a brand new word that, yeah, it's technically wrong, but it sounds completely logical inside the new language. Let's look at this in action. It's so cool. A student wanted to say to enjoy. Okay, so they started with the Italian word sfruttare. But they didn't just drop it in, they adapted it. They stuck on a Portuguese prefix, s, they added a proper Portuguese verb ending, rm, and they even got rid of the double T, which isn't really a thing in Portuguese. They built the word esfrutarem. It's wrong, sure, but it's brilliantly wrong. And here's another one, this time with a noun. A student needed the word for suffering. In Italian, that's sofferenza. So what did they do? They took the root, again they dropped the double F, and then they swapped out the Italian suffix enza for its very common Portuguese cousin enza. And the result? Sofferenza. It's a word that is totally logical, totally creative, and it shows a really deep understanding of how Portuguese words are actually put together. So you see, what we're looking at here isn't a simple memory lapse. It is a complex cognitive strategy. It proves that the learner's brain is so deeply engaged with the system of the new language that it can actually start to play with it, to blend and create new things within its rules. It's a sign of a mind that has truly internalized the system, not just memorized a list of words. As the study's author Alessandra Baldo puts it, these word creation processes represent a window into the mind of the learners. These so-called mistakes are letting us peek behind the curtain and see the machinery of language learning working in real time. And really, that brings us to the biggest takeaway of all. For anyone out there learning anything, mastery isn't about reaching some perfect state where you never, ever make mistakes. It's about the quality and the sophistication of the mistakes you make along the way. These errors aren't just road bumps. They're evidence of a much deeper understanding. So the next time you're learning something new and you stumble, just ask yourself, was that just a simple slip-up, or was it something more? What if your best mistakes aren't failures at all, but signs of a brain hard at work, building something new in truly brilliant ways?